The bed in here is one of the key objects, not in terms of the narrative, but in terms of world building, I suppose, and environmental storytelling. One of the things that we wanted right from the beginning was we wanted a light, airy house. We went with a pastel colour palette for very deliberately, because we didn't want to go down the sort of haunted house kind of route. We wanted it to feel like a nice homely space, even though some of the experiences within it might not be that pleasant or uplifting. And we also wanted to make it feel like a home that people actually live in. And so this bed was a really happy moment when we found this this unmade bed, and just putting these little things, the slippers by the bed, just added so much. And, you know, Claire kind of worked on the textures of the assets so that they'd match into the feel and the tone of the game as well. And there's things like the ironing board in the cupboard. They're just really tiny things that people probably don't notice, but if they weren't there, the house would feel stark and like a game space. All those little things were really fun to find and put in and think about, and just made the space feel alive.
I'd say about half the 3D models in the game are ones I made, and then half are ones that we found online that were like free, sort of royalty free, Creative Commons type ones. And I remember you saying at one point it was kind of like going shopping online for like your home.
Yeah.
Because we'd have a look and then just be like, oh, I like this one and I like this one, and add them to our basket.
With the handwriting, it's hard to not do your own handwriting for every single thing. And then even if you try and do different handwriting, it still looks like your own. I don't know. So it's trying to get, again, handwriting that would be suitable to that person. So like my parents all write in cursive and things like that, which even if I was to try and do it, it looks really forced. So yeah, I got like parents and family and friends to do different bits. And then yeah, for the post-its, I obviously wrote those on an actual post-it note with a Sharpie, like as if you were going to write it, and then scan those all in so that it's probably most authentic to an actual post-it note as you can get. And then when Sunita's writing changes because she's older, so I tried to almost think of like when your gran writes you a letter, and you can see as they get older it's a bit more shaky and a bit more frail and maybe a bit different. Oh yeah, the orchestra card was actually probably one of my favourites to do, because I did get a few people to sign that, just either with their name or a random name, because you want it to look like a signature, and I just thought there'd be so many people in an orchestra, maybe you don't know necessarily who they were very well, and I just thought, yeah, it'd be really funny if you were like, oh, I'm Vicky on violin, and you drew a little violin, they'd be like, oh yeah, of course, yeah. So I just thought that was quite a bit silly, but also what you probably would do in a massive card like that. Because there's not really any realism in there with any postcards or photos, which obviously are like real life. In Photoshop I used like the stencil and cutout tool a lot, so that it matched the kind of like art style of the game, while also you would know it was based off a photograph rather than just being like a made up image. You would be able to look at the picture and know what it is, even though it's not an actual photograph. And I thought that those two kind of filters, like, yeah, cut out and photocopy, those kind of styles fit quite well to break the colours up in the same palette as well. Like, you can scroll through the colours to get them at the right hue for that room or that image. There's like a few different effects that do like a similar effect. But yeah, I found that was way easier than trying to like trace individual shapes, or trying to make up an image by just drawing the shapes, when you can deconstruct a photograph to its bare levels, basically.
So we had the colour spreading when you pick up objects that was in the game. We wanted to try and play around with that effect and see if we could use it in other ways as well. And along with the visuals, one thing we really wanted to have play a key part in the game was the music and the audio, particularly in terms of what it represents with Dylan and his career. And also because there's been a lot of research around, sometimes you'll find people will listen to a song that was really important to them, and they'll be able to tell you so much about the song and maybe memories with people listening to that song, and they'll have this amazing clarity. We decided to try and link up the colour spreading to the music and make it match up to as a metaphor for her having this greater clarity while listening to the music. And I think the early version of this in the game, the colour would sort of spread just according to the volume of all the audio it could hear, which kind of looked alright, but then it didn't really match the melody of the tune. And also if you happen to walk or maybe open a drawer or close a door, then there'd be a spike in the audio and that would show up in the colour spreading as well. So the system we've got in place now, which Jake added in, takes the waveform of the track itself and uses that to change the value of the colour spreading so that it matches up.
So this is the bathroom loop section. So it's kind of using that horror aspect that we actually wanted to avoid. We didn't use very much, or as much as maybe other games like this have, the sort of horror of an empty house, and we haven't really gone down that route. That was a conscious decision we made to keep the house light and airy, and things like that. But one of the things that happens with dementia sufferers is that they do quite often wet themselves, and so in this section, Sunita's forgotten where the bathroom is. So yeah, we used the sort of empty corridor, sort of PT style looping corridor to communicate that sense of confusion and anxiety for a very real world. There's no supernatural thing happening here. It's just one of the awful predicaments that happens as a result of this disease. And we sort of iterated on it a lot. Claire had to do lots of really clever things. So you did a really great job of actually making this idea work really well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I guess one of the difficulties was as you go through any of the doors, you always had to end up back at the cloakroom. So it was like, how do you sort of do that visually without the player realizing that they've suddenly been like teleported across the house? So what I ended up doing was, as soon as you walk out of that bedroom to begin with, and this section starts, then all of those rooms disappear, and then every room behind these doors is now just a clone of that cloakroom. And when you go into it, it just gets to a point and then it teleports you across. Yeah, I think from a game design point of view, it was really interesting trying to find the balance as well between the player being frustrated and then empathizing with the character's confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And
exactly.
We had to try out a few different ways of doing it and how long the section should be, how many doors you have to go through, and if it should be that it's always a set number of doors, or if it's like a particular door that you have to open, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then we also, to make sure that people realised they were in exactly the same place, not in a room that looks kind of similar, we put the photo of, I don't know, it's like a goldfinch or something, the painting outside the door. That was one of the things that we consciously placed there so that people would know, oh, I'm back at the yellow bird again. So they'd know that they're in the same place. So yeah, there was just sort of placement of props, and yeah, the length of the sequence all took quite a lot of tinkering and iteration. There were several things we wanted to get across with the house. One was that it is in the UK, so this is a British house, has radiators and 3-point sockets and things like that, and then also that it's in the 2000s, and we thought bathrooms are one of those things that you don't update. It's like maybe every 10 years or something you update your bathroom because it's expensive. So we spent quite a lot of time looking at sort of 90s bathrooms and things like that. So this kind of, I guess you call it terracotta or something, sort of IKEA style bathroom, those lovely IKEA style blinds that we've got there on the frosted panes. But yeah, I remember the day quite vividly that we were like doing the bathroom. And it was a place that we worked on the scale of things as well quite a lot. I think the bathroom, because bathroom fixtures and fittings are quite a set sort of ergonomic scale, it was quite a good place for us to fix things like how high the door jambs were and how wide the doors were. I remember us like being in here, well, not physically in here, but essentially, and I was like, I think the door's too low, and yeah, I was sort of really working on that, weren't we?
Yeah, definitely. And so I even remember like just measuring the doors and like in my flat to see how wide doors should be, but I think even then it still needed tweaking, because then you need to make sure that the character is at the right height, and like if the field of view is the right width and stuff like that, so that everything looks as you would expect it to. And I remember we had a bit of we went through quite a lot of iterations of things like how wide the corridors were and how tall the ceilings were, because they are actually quite tall, but we ended up doing a lot of tricks like I suppose people do in real life, like moving objects higher or lower on the walls to make the ceilings look higher or lower depending on how the house is structured.
Because it's one of those things that you really take for granted, but actually human beings do notice when it's off. We don't notice when it's right, but we do notice when a window is too low, or the radiator is like giant compared to the width of a door or something. We unconsciously know all these sort of comparative sizes, so yeah, it took us a while to get that right. And the bathroom helped us out.
So yeah, as we were furnishing the house, and particularly the bathroom, there was a few objects that we struggled to find, like something that really fitted what we were after. And the bath was one of those that we found loads and loads of bathtubs, but none of them were the sort of ones that Sunita would have in her house, or they weren't, they didn't look British or something like that. So in the end, we I got my friends at Bitloom Games there's 3 of them there, and we asked each of them to model a bath, a 3D model of a bath, and then we did a little Twitter poll to have people vote on which was the best bathtub. So thank you, Henry, for making this lovely bathtub for us. So while we were doing research into how to sort of what the symptoms of dementia are and how we could maybe visualize them in the game, we came across a few videos online that showed, I guess, like some of these visual representations that we were looking into. And one of them that we found early on was a woman that was walking down the street, and she sees a puddle on the ground, and she's with her son, I think. And the son just sort of walks on and said, "Oh, come on, why have you stopped?" But from the woman's point of view, she sees, instead of a puddle, there's now this gaping hole in the ground. So it was we talked to the doctors that we've been working with as well about it, and they told us that there can be these really intense visual hallucinations that people get, particularly if there's sort of a patterned area on the ground that they can see as instead a hole in the ground. So that's where
Yeah.
this rug that we've called Black Hole Rug,
Yeah.
that's where that comes from.
And remember the woman at the Comic-Con? It was like she was the very
Oh, of
first
course, yeah.
person who mentioned it. The very first event that we took the game to was just a tiny local Comic-Con at the top of my road. There was this one woman who worked in some aspect of care with dementia sufferers, and she's like, "Well, you couldn't have all those rugs."
That's right, yeah.
We were like, "What?" And she's like, "Oh no, you can't have all those rugs and patterns around because people, they'll trip over them thinking they're objects or holes and yeah, so it was actually a really crucial piece of feedback that we got there. The other important thing that it plays here is part of the player pathway as well. We wanted to avoid having too many locked doors that only open after you've done A or B, but we had this sort of open plan aspect to the house here that we didn't want to lose, and then Black Hole Rug came in handy for that. So it was a good for our player pathway and leading the player where we wanted them to go, and also a really good piece of sort of storytelling in terms of demonstrating things that can happen when you have dementia. One of the things we really wanted to get across is that this game is set in the UK and it's a British home because a large majority of the games I play are set in the US. And yeah, there are just like tiny little differences that make a home a British home because our plug sockets are one. They're different from, the rest of Europe. We have these 3 little oblong plug sockets with the little switches on. And yeah, it was just like a real key identifier, and it's like these tiny little details. And having radiators, I mean, we have very old style radiators, so they're quite decorative, kind of Victorian style radiators. I mean, lots of homes have more modern ones than that, but we went for these kind of nice vintage looking ones. So it's just little things like that, and the style of the light switches, and the things like the depth of the skirting boards. And I mean, we really did, we have Pinterest boards with sort of Victorian houses, sort of British Victorian houses, and looked at all the sort of, and the sash windows, the style of the windows in the house as well. So yeah, there's lots of little details, and we have ceiling roses for the lights, so that's sort of plasterwork, sort of cornicing and things that you'd get in a Victorian house. So lots of little touches like that we thought about to bring to life this British home. Yeah, so the bone of contention that sits between them is when to have children or if they're having children, and the pressure that's on Sunita as an Indian woman in a sort of male-dominated scientific academic field, and not wanting to put her career on hold, which particularly in the 60s and 70s could have been just it could have ended her, been the end of her career, really. You have babies and then you go away and live in the house. And so, yeah, there was that pressure that was between them. And so this is the first kind of indication of that in the game. And it was just, I think it's quite an interesting dynamic because he's a young man who wants kids, and men, it's assumed that it's women who drive couples having kids, sort of women get broody, men don't really. That's the assumption that people make. So, it's a slightly different dynamic between them. But it was really important that he didn't come across as a bully, or that he was trying to make her stay at home or become this. I think he just wanted to have this. He feels like it would complete their happy relationship, as opposed to trying to force her to give up her career in any way. That's what we wanted to try. Hopefully that comes across. But it's just because he loves her and wants to have kids.
Just before this, we were trying to work out how long the colour spread has been in the game, and we think it was either the original Game Jam or it was just after that, so definitely within the first few weeks of development. And we put this colour spread in because we thought it would be a really nice visual metaphor for her memories sort of returning to her as she looks at these really important objects in her house. And in terms of the way it works, there's, for every 3D model in the game, so like the wall or the stool, the trophy, the painting, there's 2 textures, a grayscale texture, and then the fully coloured in one. And then there's a third texture which has a sort of splodgy pattern. So as you watch the colour spreading, you can kind of see it follows this sort of gradienty spreading pattern. And it's definitely one of the things visually, I think, that stands out to people a lot. And they always say, like, in terms of the way it looks, I really love the colour spreading, because I think it helps tell the story in a really nice way, and it's just really, nice visually.
Yeah, it was a really important addition to the game that tied the narrative to the space. A really nifty piece of sort of narrative design, basically, because she is in part of that space, sort of an organic part of the space, and the space is growing with her memories and reflecting what's happening to her. So yes, it works perfectly in that respect. One of the interesting things was when people started playing it, they wanted to, because gamers, they love to like just join up all the dots and make everything this satisfying whole. So they wanted to, that's like, oh, have I missed an object? Because there's bits of the room that aren't coloured in. So they wanted to know, like, how do I get all the colour to meet? Which is just like a really I find it really interesting, the sort of like psychology of gamers, and that idea of making things perfect, an imperfect thing. A game gives you an imperfect scenario and you have to fix it. But part of our thinking behind it is like, A, you don't fix dementia. B, memory is imperfect anyway. So it was just the perfect way of representing that, basically.
For a long time in the game, we had this concept of Sunita's emails. We had an email from, a couple of emails from her colleagues at work, Klaas and Mona, but they were, for at least a year and a half of development, they were just printouts that were lying on the kitchen table, I think. So, which didn't really make a lot of sense in terms of why they would have been there from years before. So eventually we decided to add a computer that you can go in and look at her emails, which I certainly had a lot of fun with, trying to come up with this sort of, 90s style email interface with this cursor. And then Jake made these great like log on and log off and click sounds as well to go with it. So this is one of my favorite. I don't know. I guess it is one of my favorite parts, just in terms of nerdiness in the game. So you can go in, and then it shows you that you're in the archive, which I thought would make the most sense in terms of why there's these emails from 5-6 years ago, rather than being new emails in her inbox. And I did think a little bit about the numbers here as well. The fact that she's got quite a lot of unread emails in her inbox and maybe some unfinished drafts. Not many from her work now, but perhaps she doesn't really use her computer as much as she used to. And then if you click on the individual emails, then it should give you enough information. The fact that you can see the current date and time in the bottom right of the screen, and then you can see when this email was sent and who it's from. Oh, and the screensaver. I also added this classic screensaver, which was also a very fun thing to make, as it was the screensaver I had on one of the first family computers we had.
So the second piece I started writing after having done some research on film music and game music was a piece for Sanita. I liked the idea of having themes for each character, and I felt that we needed a musical representation for Sanita somewhere in the game. So this is when I started writing a piece that became Bittersweet Memories. I tried to write something which felt true to Sanita's character, but after writing it, everybody agreed that, yes, Dave, this sounds like a very nice piece of music, but we're just not really sure where we're going to use it. So it wasn't until Gary cut the trailer that it actually found a home. Once it was in the trailer, I had to make a few edits, as there was a piece of action happening within the trailer that didn't match the piece of music, so I had to rewrite a small section there. And we also ended up using it for the credits as well, which was fantastic, as I really enjoyed writing that piece. The Bossa Nova piece was my favorite track to write. I started this after, I guess it would have been the summer of 2018, and I spent a lot of time listening to Antonio Carlos Jobim, Joao Gilberto, Stan Getz, and I had to do some research and try and write something which was convincing as a bossa, but also something which wouldn't detract from the dialogue that was happening in the scene. It really needed to underscore that and not try and take over. And I was pleased with the result. The music for the hallway was my nemesis. Claire, Jake, and I went through what feels like 20 different options for the way that we could actually have the scene play out in the game, to make it easy for Jake's standpoint to actually implement the audio in the game, but also to make it easy for me to write and for Claire to program. I think initially the player had free control over how they went into the hallway, how they walked along the hallway, and how long that entire process would take. Which for me meant that I'd have to try and write something more abstract, like the intro music, that was going to help kind of sell that feeling of anxiety, and kind of building tension. My initial attempt at this was very heavily over-orchestrated. I had a full symphony orchestra, a lot of percussion. It just felt out of place. So once I pared that back down to just a piano representing Dylan and a string quartet representing Sanita, I felt happier with the piece that I had, but I didn't feel that I could communicate what I wanted to, given the constraints that we were under. So we ended up putting the player on in a cutscene almost, and having a fixed length of time for me to write to. And I think that helps kind of, at least for me, it helped build that mounting tension and emotion, and again using melodic content from elsewhere in the soundtrack to do that. I think overall I had the time of my life working on this soundtrack. It's something that I've always wanted to do, but not something I was ever sure I would get the opportunity to. And I am very thankful to Shella, Claire, and the team for making me feel so welcome and allowing me to be a part of their project. I really do hope that you enjoy the soundtrack and you love playing Before I Forget. When I got involved in the project, The first piece that was written was a piano piece for Dylan. This piece took me a few days to write. The main inspiration for that was the music of Ludovico Einaudi, who's a piano player whose music I absolutely love. It crosses that boundary from sort of modern classical to popular. The way that his melodies are so approachable and so memorable. I wanted to write something that was similar to that for Dylan. So I spent a couple of days with the idea of what was happening to Sunita and what the theme of the game was, which felt to me that she was trying to put this picture back together. So I wanted to create a melody that represented that. And I think it worked. At least when I sent the first piece back to the team, everybody was really excited, and that was a wonderful feeling. So my process for writing is I have a setup on my desk with a keyboard and digital audio workstation. I generally approach it with an idea in mind. I'll have done some research, I'll have found some inspiration, I'll have got some little snippets of melody either written down or recorded into my phone. And I'll start trying to build up a picture in my head about what I want to hear, and then we'll use the keyboard, all of the samples and instruments on the computer to be able to find something which satisfies that picture that I've created in my mind. And this process can take days, weeks, minutes. It varies depending on the complexity of the piece that I'm writing. I wouldn't consider myself a professional composer. I am a software engineer by trade, and that's my day job. I've been writing music, though, for the last 10-15 years for my own satisfaction. And I think this is the first music that I'll have shared more broadly. So I'm very excited and also daunted by that. Another challenge for me was the introduction music. This is because I needed to write something which was more abstract, could be looped for a long time without feeling repetitive. To write this piece, I took a lot of snippets of melody from elsewhere in the score, had them play at different random intervals, and then interspersed some vinyl record sound, which is something that Jake, the sound designer, had used elsewhere in the game. And came up with this ethereal texture, which I think helps kind of build that initial feeling of tension at the beginning of the game.
We added this desk calendar along with a couple of other places throughout the game where you can see what the time or the date is, just because otherwise we did try and make the sort of the scenery fit with the time period, but I think it could be sort of within a reasonable range of a few years. Mm-hmm. So we added this so that they sort of knew exactly when it was. But the thing I really like about this is that it changes throughout the game over the course of 5 days, I think. So I'm sure if you really wanted to, you could probably work out exactly when any sort of time skips happen and exactly what day and time it is at any point, which I like because it's quite hidden.
This is, what I just called the sort of lonely dinner. And it's really sad. It sort of underlines his absence and her not always knowing that he's not there and he's not coming back. And there's that constant confusion about where he is. And, at the beginning of the day, she's certain that he's there putting the tea on, and now she's certain that he's coming home for dinner, but she's always constantly thinking he's in the other room, and now she's like, oh, well, he's out, but he's coming back. She always has this sense of he'll be here in a minute, and it's just a really sad way to underline that feeling. And the idea came from when my brother left home to go to uni. And it was really sad for me and my mum because it had always been the three of us. And I remember putting a plate out for him at dinner, and it just made me really sad that. So it's kind of what I tapped into for that scene. It's just like that real sense of absence when you do something completely banal for someone who's not there anymore is really sad.
I think there was a point in development where we kind of went through the game and based on partly on people's feedback as well of feeling like they didn't have a clear goal sometimes in the game. They weren't quite sure sort of what the main thing they were supposed to be doing was. We went through and added a lot more of these reminders that what you're doing throughout is sort of trying to remember where Dylan is. And I think that's when we added a lot of these things of just reminders that Sunita is thinking about Dylan and Dylan isn't there. Oh, we had that spreadsheet where we...
Oh yeah, the spreadsheet.
We tried to mark all the key points in the game and sort of the emotional impact that we wanted and the sort of intensity of it throughout the game, but then we also
color coded the moods and what each scene was doing, why it was there, what it was doing. Is it increasing tension? Is it about loss and sadness? Which parts of the themes it was dealing with, so that we could see what was happening in every scene where and what had too much weighting and what we'd forgotten in places.
Yeah, and then from that we also that's where we noted down where she was, or Sunita and also the player were kind of reminded about Dylan and the goal of find Dylan, and that's where we sort of realised that we weren't really reiterating that enough. We were really inspired by the one that game company released for their development on Journey. They had a sort of similar but much more complex chart.
Yeah, that was in the Victoria and Albert Museum exhibition.
Amazing.
They had this spreadsheet, and at the opening of that, which was like a sort of industry opening event, everybody was flocked around that, and I turned to someone and I said, "Are we queuing to look at a spreadsheet right now?" And they were like, "Yep." And I took loads of photos, and I was like, "Oh my god, Claire!" It's like I have the key.
And I love spreadsheets, so I was very happy.
Yeah, exactly.
Doors.
Yeah. I mean, doors are like renowned for being just a nightmare to deal with in games. I remember like early on reading this article which was just like how a door is perceived by every different sort of discipline within games development, you know, from the artist through to the programmer to the QA, the writer, you know, where the writer might be like, oh, what's the purpose of the door and what is it telling the player about the house? And then the programmer's like, yeah, but which way does the door swing and how exactly is the hinge going to work? Which is a problem.
That's our conversation. That's our relationship right there.
That's basically it, yeah. What's the
Me
purpose,
putting
but how
doors
does it
in, I was like, but the door's got to be ajar. But how does the player not get trapped behind the door? Like, I don't know. But we need that door.
Yeah, I think I remember like early on I decided for some reason that the doors, the best way technically to do it would be like a saloon door where they could open both ways, because then the player couldn't get trapped and the door would always open away from you when you went to interact with it. But then the problem we had was in the corridor, you could end up with all the doors opening inwards into the corridor and you'd have to like weave your way around all these doors.
So when I wrote the original script, I had this, I wrote, and you step out of the study and you hear music coming from another room, and then you walk into the room and there's music playing. And so this was, I think I was very definite that was going to happen, and we also thought it's a really great way to create a clear player pathway so that we'd lead the player into the room we wanted them to go into. But yeah, so for the longest time until we got Jake, our audio person, on board, the music would be playing, but you wouldn't hear it until you stepped inside the room. So that was a real technical challenge, but something that I don't think it was just me that felt it was really important, but it was really important in terms of drawing the player in there, and it was just important for the mood and the tone of that sort of haunting aspect, because Dylan isn't in the space physically, he's represented by his music, he's the music. So it's the first time you meet Dylan, as it were, and it just felt really important that he wasn't just trapped in that bedroom, that he was bleeding out, and sort of and to just give that natural feel of how sound works, right? It doesn't just stay at a threshold like a vampire.
Yeah, it's interesting because it seems like something that would be so simple technically to do, but so we're using Unity for this, and the sound doesn't really work as you would expect it to in real life. And so you can put an audio source down where the sound should emanate from, and then it extends in a sphere around that. But unless you do some extra coding and technical bits, it doesn't take into account things like walls. So that's where you'd hear the bleeding sound if you're in the study. So I did some initial sort of hacks and fixes to try and make that sound better, where I'd put a big collider in the study and say, if you're inside here, then the volume of the music is at 0. And then say, as soon as you leave the study, then the music will kind of gradually fade up to the volume that the game engine thinks it's supposed to be at. But it never sounded quite right. So yeah, I'm really happy. Like you say, Jake came on board and he was able to make it sound a lot more natural and the way we wanted it to sound.
Yeah.
So I think he added some density onto the walls and stuff like that, so that you would hear it as if you were in a real house. Because it's a first-person game and you never see Sunita or any of the other characters directly in terms of the 3D models or anything like that, we knew it was going to be really important to have images of the characters so that you connect to them and you understand who they are, as well as reading Sunita's thoughts and looking at the objects in her house. So early on we had some, I guess, reference material for how they would look on our Pinterest board, and then we just used one of those pictures in the game. So we had this picture of this couple in the game that, I don't know who they were, but it was just from Google Images, but they were Sunita and Dylan for a long, long time, until we got Emma on board to do the character art, which I think as soon as she sent us the first few concepts that she'd drawn, it was just like, yes, this is who they are. It's amazing. They suddenly have life and we know so much more about them.
Yeah, definitely. I've worked with Emma before. She's just my go-to artist person. She's done my online avatar, which is the black girl typing. If you've ever been to my Twitter or any place I am online, and she does my business cards, she does everything, but she also illustrates. So I thought maybe I can ask Emma to do this, because I know she can. Whenever I give her a brief, she just nails it every time. And as soon as we saw them, it was great. So I tried to give as full a brief as possible. Claire and I, we've discussed these characters a lot. We know a lot about them, that, some elements of which are in the game, some didn't make it in, but we know these characters so that you feel like you know them. And so we had to basically communicate that to Emma as fully as possible. So there was things like, Sunita she's more of a Peggy from Mad Men sort of person, as opposed to a sort of 60s bombshell type. So she's kind of she has the mini dresses and things, but it's always like a shift dress and Mary Jane's and, you know, shorter hair and things like that. So it was just things like that, just like nailing what is her style, what is her personality type. Then with Dylan, it was like, you know, just like he has to have, like my stipulations where he has to have good hair. He's constantly smoking or drinking or both. He's tall and, you know, just make him sexy, and, you know, everyone needs to fall in love with him, as well as Sunita. And I think one of the interesting things when I was looking for our very first piece of like reference photography, so that couple that I found was actually really hard to find, because I was looking for a mixed race couple from like the 60s, but the woman had to be the person of colour and the man was white, and you could find the reverse fairly easily. So at that time, for a white man to be with a woman of colour was obviously really unusual, because I couldn't find much photography that reflected that at all, which I thought was interesting and disappointing, but not really surprising. This is the 70s flashback scene, which is a fully immersive moment for Sunita. She's completely transported to this moment in the past, and we've changed the layout of the house to indicate that it's a different time. So doorways have moved. The wallpaper is extremely groovy. And there are items that you find in the study at the start of the game that are now in the dining room, and there are boxes to indicate that they've just moved in, and things aren't where you expect them to be. So that's kind of the purpose of this, is just to show how full on the sort of the memories can be for dementia sufferers. And also it's, you know, a good place to set up their relationship and like a different aspect of their relationship. So this is their wedding day, they've moved in, they're having a party, so you find cards and notes and your background on their friends and what kind of people they are, basically.
Yeah, it's a really lovely scene, and I think one of the things that we wanted to do with it as well was have it to be one of the most kind of real feeling, like vivid flashbacks that she had. And so rather than with, say, the other ones like the telescope flashbacks and the rain scenes, where it's as if it's happening more in her head or more sort of in a separate space, you know, it kind of fades out and then you're in this other separate area.
It's like a shift in reality, isn't it, basically?
Yeah. So she's still in her house and she still thinks that she's right where she was standing, but everything around her is now different.
So originally, when we first were in the game jam, we were like, okay, we're going to have some objects to interact with. So we had a key randomly on the floor that we could never figure out what the key was for. So eventually the key got taken out. But the way I wrote it, so you interact with the key and it said something like, oh, one of those metal unlocking objects or something like that. The way I wrote it, when we then later sort of months down the line got the medical consultants that we got on board, that was one of the things they picked up was the way that we were the language we were using. You remember more? I can never remember which way round it was.
I think it's because they said to us people tend to remember function rather than form. So instead of remembering, oh, it's a metal object for the key, they like something that might come to mind more is, oh, it's a thing that unlocks doors or unlocks stuff. So for this watch, then I guess that was when we talked about it, and then you wrote a different line for
Yeah, exactly. So we don't have a key anymore. But yeah, so we have this the reason, that's the reason why she describes it in that particular way, is that that is a way that dementia sufferers will think about objects, which was quite interesting. And a good example of the invaluable advice that we got from our medical consultants.
Yeah, this scene's gone through. Well, it's not even like a few iterations. It was more just it was in an early state for about 2.5, 3 years, and just didn't really get looked at. It was like just an unkept garden.
The doors were locked for quite a while,
Yeah.
and then there was this, and because we had the most of the house was actually locked up, apart from the bit where the demo takes place, was locked off for like months and months and months and months, wasn't it? And so the rest of the house was just covered in cobwebs and, had dust sheets over all the furniture type thing. And then, when we got that fully polished and we were going into production, we were like, I guess we better go and see what's happening in the rest of the house.
Oh, that was
I went into the garden
a day.
and it was just full of chairs. Was it like a dining table or something? It was just, I went in and I messaged Claire and I was like, oh, the garden's just full of chairs. It was permanently raining and full of chairs.
Yeah, because I was trying out this shader with like the colour spreading with the rain, and so I needed some objects, and I was like, well, maybe they'd have like, some garden furniture. So I was like, okay, well, I don't want to make anything new. I'll just put in some of the other chairs. And we had quite a lot of ideas for the visuals, because it was again like an area that we wanted to be more surreal, but not in the same way as the hallway. It was surreal, but in a very light and kind of dreamlike way, rather than the tense surrealness of the corridor.
Yeah.
And I remember one iteration I did like a test where there was a lot of trees outside, and then the ground was sort of transparent and you could see all their roots, and the colour would kind of spread in, which you pointed out kind of looks a bit
it's like a bit like
brain or something.
Yeah, like neurons.
Yeah.
So we moved away from that because it looked like the bit of like beginning of a Marvel film.
Yeah.
They go like in on a cellular level.
Which it looked cool, but not quite.
Yeah, it did look really cool, but and also not horror exactly, but just had a sort of more macabre kind of feel to it. It wasn't quite as soft and pretty as this,
because we always talked about it being this really bright sunlit space, with the rain, and just very soft. And then the idea of the house is sort of gone, it's not really important anymore. It's just you see remnants of it. But then also importantly, like it's the place where the memories have kind of, well, she's remembered what's happened to Dylan at this point. And then with the rain as well, kind of circulating back to the start where she talks about meeting in the rain under the umbrella.
It's that important sort of full circle moment for the narrative.
When you walk to the end of the garden, everything else has disappeared, and all you see is this sort of flickering image of Dylan, and I think it's nice that at the end that's like, you just have, you've always had this sort of one goal throughout the game, but now there's literally nothing else. You're just walking towards Dylan. I think it's just the perfect way to end it.
Yeah, so the glasses, this is the first object you interact with in the game. And I think you came to me one day, Claire, and you'd added the blur that gets cleared away when you pick up the glasses, which was really cool. And the first time we showed it, was it at Adventure X where we showed it, like in a games specific And yeah, people really loved that. People with glasses especially were like, oh yeah, God, that's me in the morning. Or yeah, people really related to it, didn't they?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was definitely like a lot of fine tuning in terms of, I don't know how much blur is too much blur, and like making sure that they can still actually see where the glasses are and also pick them up. But yeah, definitely people were like, oh, yep, I can relate to that.
The whole ending of the game was a journey, and the hallway became a really crucial part of that, because we needed to get the player from the closet with the letters to the living room, and we needed that impetus and a sense of urgency and a sense that there's a climax coming, that something's been triggered. Yeah, I mean, we had all sorts of conversations, didn't we, about how much control the player has, whether I expect them to just walk down and find it, in which case we have to kind of signpost it in a particular way, but they can still walk into all the other rooms. And we wanted clarity at this point, because you just want a clarity of purpose and momentum at this point to get to the living room and find out the final thing. And so we figured out this kind of directed way of having it and making it kind of surreal and symbolizing her kind of, really losing her way a bit.
Yeah, I think once we decided to just make it almost a completely separate scene, then it made a lot more sense and it was a lot easier.
Yeah.
It kind of tied together the whole newspaper theme as well, all the letter closet that had all these clippings in, we then used in the hallway scene as I guess sort of an amalgamation of all the tension and anxiety she'd like been feeling throughout the last few months and years, I suppose.
One of the influences on this bit for me was Virginia, which does that surreal kind of tumbling of images and ideas really well.
Yeah, and it was really interesting, like designing because there's 4 sections of corridor, and just making them all feel distinct and making the way that you move along them match the tension that she's feeling and the way, and then matching that to the sort of musical ramp up as well. So it switches between you're kind of moving along straight sections of corridor and then corner sections, where you're not quite sure what's coming around the corner, and then the final one, which is just a mess of a corridor. And whichever way you go, you never get to where you're trying to get to, and then there's constant voices all jumbled on top of each other, and I think it comes to its climax.
It basically pulls together all the elements that we've had throughout the game, and just pulls them all in: the audio, the visual, the music as character, the sort of confusing the player, all those elements, and then just like pushes them to 11 at this moment to get us to the living room. Yeah, so the painting on the wall in here, we wanted to have some aspects that indicated Sunita's Indian heritage, apart from her name. And I actually did this piece of art in a little bit of software that came on my Galaxy phone that I downloaded onto my Galaxy phone because I had a stylus pen, so I was like playing around with it, and I was like, oh, maybe I can do some art for the room. And I was Googling and I found this beautiful, so this is my sort of homage my paltry homage to a really fantastic female Indian painter that people might not know, called Amrita Shergill. And she's really worth looking up because her paintings are really stunning and, have to be really sort of diminish her as a painter in her own right. She's sort of comparable to Gauguin in terms of the flatness of colours and the simplicity and sort of beautiful composition of her works. But she focuses on mainly on Indian women in just sort of everyday scenes, just kind of like this one, like I've tried to do, women just sitting sort of staring into space one day whilst they're maybe doing a task or resting against a tree or something, and they're really stunning. So yeah, it's a good excuse to check out Rita Shergill. I recommend her work.
The colours are really nice as well. It sort of really stands out in this room. It doesn't really, she doesn't have a memory about it. There's nothing that really tells you who it is, so you can kind of just make up your own sort of narrative about what member of her, if it's a member of her family or if it's maybe someone completely unrelated, or that kind of thing, if it's just a painting that she likes. But then I really like at the end of one of the stargazing scenes when she, you leave that scene and then she's in this room facing the painting and she asks where her aunt is, and it's looking at the painting, which I think was a complete accident, but it sort of fits really nicely that maybe this was her.
That's so cool. Yeah, I'd never thought about that. I suppose because I know like why I painted that and what I was trying to do. Yeah, that sort of mystery wasn't there for me, so I didn't make that association. But that's really cool. Oh, I hope other people have had similar wonderings about the painting. Yeah, so the jump cut is something that we introduce. So we have a few of them, and it kind of does several things. It's really great sort of cinematic technique, and 30 Flights of Loving and Virginia, which was heavily influenced by 30 Flights, both use jump cuts really effectively, and I loved the way they used them in those games. And they both use them in quite cinematic ways, just as a sort of editing technique. But for us, it has a kind of dual purpose because Sunita loses lots of chunks of time. And yeah, sort of there are lots of sort of cinematic influences. There are films that we both watched, a film called Jonathan, which uses jump cuts really effectively. And I think I was like, oh, watch this, and the way that audio works with the jump cut as well. So I think of all of our jump cuts, this is my favorite. Which one's your favorite jump cut? Just because from the bathroom to the blank screen and then the alarm clock is just, and I think it's really effective because it's the first one, so players won't be expecting it. Yeah, and it's my favorite. I just kind of like feel complete glee every time I play through and I get to this bit because it just works exactly the way I want it to. This real sort of sense of we're in one moment and then she's somewhere completely different because she's lost herself again for a moment. And again, you've done like a really great job on implementing that, Claire.
Thank you.
The letters in the closet, I actually fill in quite a lot of backstory for the relationship. So I did quite a lot of research on hotel stationery, the vintage hotel stationery, which is a thing that you can collect and stuff, because I always quite like booking into hotels and having a look what their stationery is like. And yeah, so I kind of was inspired a little bit by the Grand Budapest Hotel, because it has really, really beautiful letterhead for that fictional hotel. All these letters are from Dylan whilst he's on tour in Europe on one of his concert tours. So I'm like, which cities could he be at, and then what would the hotels be called? So I did quite a lot of research into hotels and what they'd all be called, and then sort of thinking of all the dates so that they tied in with Sunita's letters and things like that. And we have these little photos. So I went I went to this event that happens in London called Secret Cinema, and it's a sort of full on immersive theatre type event, and each one is themed around a film. So I went to the Blade Runner one with my brother, and we were all dressed up in our cyberpunk gear. But my brother's friends had been ahead of us, so they had a slot, a few months before, and they were like, "You've got to have photos because that's a really great currency within the world." So my brother went onto eBay and just bought this sort of envelope or bag full of old photos. So we had these little black and white photos. We went to Secret Cinema. We never found the actor that engaged with us with these photos. My brother was like, "I've still got these bloody photos." He's like, "You can have them." He's like, "I'm sure you'll find something weird to do with them." And then it was only when we were like, "Oh, we really need some things to populate this this space, this closet." I was like, "Oh, I have these photos that I never used for Secret Cinema, and I'll have a look through and see if there's anything." And then there were just some like brilliant ones. There's sort of like a scene with like palm trees and that wedding, and yeah, like lots of them worked really well. So that is where the photos come from in this room.
So funny. I just didn't know where you got them from, and you were like, "Oh, I've got these photos for you, Claire. Like, you can put them in the game." I was like, "Okay, are they your
Okay.
This area of like the game is just so nice. I think it's so personal, and obviously she's just put all these things up that are really important to her and memories, and yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, it does look really nice. And it's a really nice kind of interlude, a quiet moment for just finding out more about them and their personalities. I mean, the thing we really needed to get across is we needed to sell this relationship, to talk about it in really sort of mercenary terms. But you had to believe in their relationship, and I think it's quite nice that Dylan comes across as, he's quite light-hearted and funny, and she's a little bit more earnest, and yeah, and he adores her. Clearly, he's always like, can we be together? When are we gonna see each other? And yeah, I think that's really nice. And it's also an element of her kind of maybe hoarding tendencies that might be a part of her dementia. This kind of obsessive collection of things. So that was something we wanted to hint at as well.
One thing that I am really happy with technically in this game is the way that the lighting works. We wanted a way of making places like the wardrobe really dark so that you couldn't quite see what was in there, and you had to go in and it would sort of draw people in that way. But the sort of basic way that the lighting was set up, I couldn't find a way of making it really dark in one place and really light in another place easily. So I ended up just making it so that every single texture inside the wardrobe would just be several shades darker. I think in the case of the wardrobe, they're just completely black textures, so that you don't see any detail of the objects themselves. And then when you turn the light on, then it turns that up to the sort of normal bright colours that they're supposed to be. Yeah, which I was really happy with.
It's one of those things that just makes it feel real, like a real space. It's cool. I mean, it's like even on TV shows, they don't manage to get nighttime looking dark quite often. Like people turn out their bedside lights and it's like, oh, we can still see everything. That's really weird. So yeah, it kind of negates that sort of dissonance. Oh God, the lounge, another problem child.
It really didn't come together, this one, until right at the end.
Right at the end. Oh my gosh. I always felt so bad because you'd be like, oh, we've got a new build and, I think it's really great or whatever. And then I'd be playing it and there'd be lots of cool new stuff. And then I'd get to the living room and I'd be like, Oh, I was like, but the ending's just not working.
Mhm.
And everybody would be like, oh God.
I mean, you were
And, like,
totally
it just-
right, but it was
Yeah, it was.
it took so long for us to just figure it out, I think, about, because it's such an
Yeah.
important scene, and how
Mhm.
do we tie everything in the game together. I think the hallway did a really good job of kind of getting us to this point, and then we're like,
Yeah.
okay, now we're here, what do we do?
So you get through the door after this amazing hallway, and it's like, now what?
Yeah.
And yeah, it was really hard to direct the player, and because it's this big open room, and then we've got was like, so how do we get, to the newspaper, and when do we put it there? But then if we put it over there, the player sometimes just goes straight there and they miss all the other stuff. And
Yeah, I think that's why we settled on this idea of the objects fading in one by one, partly to solve that issue of making sure, you don't come in and go straight to the newspaper, and direct the emotional experience of the room more. And also, I suppose, to symbolize these memories that she's completely forgotten, gradually coming back to her as she starts piecing together more and more the final parts of what happened.
yeah. So the crucial decision was so we had this argument that would just play out. And the crucial decision that we came to finally was, well, what happens if we break up the argument and attach it to different objects? And then everything just fell into place when we decided to do that.
The voice actors, Anjali Kunapanini and Mason Scott Robinson, Sunita and Dylan did just an amazing job in this scene. That argument, it had to be really emotionally charged, and you really had to kind of feel that this was something that they'd obviously had been a point of contention for, like, between them for years and years of their relationship, and it was just coming to a head.
Yeah, they did do a great job of just bringing the characters to life. Sounds really cliched, but that is exactly how it feels. And just because the important thing was that I didn't want it to feel like Dylan was a bully, or I didn't want people to fall out of love with Dylan. So that was a really delicate balance, because he is angry here. So it was just it was a real subtle. We did quite a few takes for this scene just to get that kind of balance right and understand. Yeah, it's like getting across those years of that little thorn in the side of their relationship that kind of led to this tragic event, and they did a really great job of getting that. Yeah, so this is Maria, the carer, Sinisa's carer, and the voicemail was in the very first Game Jam draft. I'm pretty sure, but through the iterations, we've sort of had discussions, didn't we, about how present Maria should be, whether she phones again, whether how many notes she has. I think one of the people that we talked to, Matt, and there was a discussion about maybe making Maria more of a present figure, and adding that sense of threat or something. But we decided to just keep it to this light touch. Yes. So that she has a few notes in the kitchen, and I think we just wanted to indicate that she's not just abandoned living alone in this house with dementia, that there is a care system, or maybe she can afford to pay for private care because their house is quite nice and they're quite well to do. But her response to it is that she doesn't always remember exactly who Maria is, especially this detached voice on a machine. It's maybe not the best way to communicate with her.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, like, trying to figure out where exactly to put this voicemail as well. Early on, it was in the dining room, I believe, for quite a long time, but we decided to put it a little bit earlier in the game. Otherwise, it's, probably halfway through the game before you know that Maria even exists, and she's quite an important presence, like one of the main people that Sunita sees on a regular basis.
Yeah, and also it was a good way to draw the player into bedroom 2, because obviously there's a long corridor and they could walk straight past this area. So so it serves a few purposes really, this location. So yeah, but Maria moved around quite a lot. So the tins of peaches, this is actually a reference to a novel that we both read like really early on. Yeah, it's a book called Elizabeth is Missing by Emma Healy, and it's a murder mystery, but the person investigating the murder or the whodunit or whatever is a woman with dementia, and there's a really sort of heartbreaking moment in it where her daughter is like, Mum, you've got to stop buying tins of peaches, and she's just like, I don't know, and she says, and don't go out anywhere and don't buy any peaches. So she goes out to buy milk and bread or something, but then when she gets to the shop she gets confused and forgets why she's there, and then picks up a can of peaches, and it's just really it's really heartbreaking. And so we put some peaches in the cupboard just as an homage to that, a little nod to that lovely book.
Yeah, it was such a good book for reference. I remember I had a pencil, and as I was reading it I was just like making little notes in the side about, this is like an interesting idea, like I wonder if we can use like inspiration from that somewhere in the game. Yeah, having those peaches there also is kind of a nice way of then showing this relationship with Maria a bit more, as well as having this other voice there in the house that's saying, actually, you don't need 20 cans of peaches, you've already got loads.
Yeah, so then Sunita's always countering Maria. I think Maria's just a frustration in her life. She's always finding a sort of frustration. The notes, and like, why is she telling me what to do? And just leave me alone, I'm fine. And that sort of other side of dementia that can be like super upsetting. I mean, we don't really go down that route of the dementia sufferers can be quite violent and get extremely angry and frustrated and afraid, but we kind of touch on it a little bit here. She does get quite she's quite short, and I'm sure she's frowning when she talks about Maria in these notes. The pill bottle, well, it's been in different iterations. I like the way now that it's in it's a more practical, it's not just like a bottle of pills, which it was originally. I mean, this bottle of pills has been on that shelf in this bathroom since the very beginning, because it was just there as a signifier. So we had a bottle, and I looked up a known medication for dementia and kind of checked it with the sort of medical consultants we had. So that pretty much hasn't changed, apart from maybe the name that's on it, and that's about it, and the shape of it. It's changed from bottles.
I mean, the original one was just a 2D sprite that I did in paint. I think it said like pills on it or something, and it had a great sound effect as well, just like
Oh yeah, it had that terrible rattling sound on it that just that kind of startled you. It was so like abrupt. Yeah, the music's used quite a lot for dementia sufferers to help them remember things. It's we all have that thing where we hear a piece of music and can be transported back to a good time or a sad time or whatever. So it works well for that. And it's a nice piece of interactivity for the player as well.
Yeah, and I think once we had decided to have like that actual radio interface, then that meant that we had other channels as well that we had to think about, what would make sense to go here. So it was then quite a nice opportunity to add these other little bits of world building.
Texture.
Yeah, world building and texture to the game. And so we actually have a snippet from an entire radio play in there as well, which I don't know if you want to talk about.
Yeah, so it's just a radio play I wrote when I was starting on my journey as a game writer. So I wrote a radio drama and produced it with Dave Tucker, who is a good friend, and he did an amazing piece of music for it. And that's why I asked him to do the music for Before I Forget. And then it's really kind of, and then I had this idea, it's like, oh, what if we included the included the radio play on our radio. I was like, oh, maybe we can put snippets of that on. And then we thought, well, maybe we can make the full radio play available. So yeah, it's kind of nice to see that. It's like I knew there would be a purpose for that radio play.
I think the other nice thing with the radio is that we were able to, I think similar to in how the music from the bedroom sort of draws you in to that room, we were able to use the radio as another piece of like guiding the player around the house and sort of leading them to the next bit of the game in a more organic way. So Jake implemented the technical audio side of things in the game, and I know that that was one of the more challenging parts of the game for him, was like how to actually have these sounds that draw you in to another part of the house from quite a distance away. What he ended up doing was kind of almost having it on rails. So he had the source of the audio move down the corridor as you followed it along. So it was always just like a few meters ahead of you, drawing you to the right place.
So the scenes that we call the rain scenes, which are Sunita's flashbacks about the first time she met Dylan. So originally we only had, when you pick up the umbrella in the closet at the beginning of the game, she talks about, we met in the rain and the rain got heavier. And then again, just we, sort of talking through with people. We've, had several people that were really helpful and played the game for us and, chat it through with them. Yeah, so this idea kind of was formed about maybe making more of that scene or having more elements of that memory. So I actually wrote it as a piece of prose. Like, what did it look like? What did it feel like? What were they both thinking? And kind of wrote my way into that scene. And then our additional writer, Martine, kind of took that piece of prose and pulled bits out, which then became the kind of dialogue that we have. You wanted to get across that he obviously really liked her, and yeah, just the different attitudes they had to that meeting. She was quite reticent, and I didn't want him to be too sort of cocky or to feel like too much of like, creepy guy picks up woman in park. So yeah, it's a real delicate balance.
Yeah, I think these interlude sections we added quite late. I think it was after there was a game you played.
Oh yeah, because I was playing Life is Strange 2, which is incredible. So Life is Strange always have these interlude moments, like in the original game. there's just like lazing on the bed and it's sunny afternoon and this nice music plays over the top. And yeah, so I was playing Life is Strange 2 whilst in the middle of development of this, or I suppose towards maybe last third or something. And I was like, oh yeah, these are really nice, cool moments. And you know, Dave makes such beautiful music that I thought it would be a nice moment just to get that sense of a person living alone and those moments of inactivity where you're not she's not going to be wandering around the house interacting with things all the time. There are just going to be times when she's just looking out the window, and it's a kind of, I suppose, a bittersweet, because the scenes are very beautiful, a bird table, but there's kind of this sense of loneliness as well. Yeah, that we just wanted to get across, and the time passing.
The time passing part of it was it was definitely like quite fun to work on in terms of the visuals for it and how to represent time actually going by when you're just looking at this still image. And this is about the only animation I think that's in the game is in these sections. But yeah, so you can actually see the flowers moving and the birds flying past and the clouds moving. Well, we talked about having the sort of light changing as well, so it's like she's been there for more than just a few minutes. So yeah, I think early on, I remember we were talking and had this idea of like Sunita looking out the window and seeing the stars and sort of connecting the constellations, and especially around the idea of her longer term memory being less affected, so she was able to remember these really like things that she'd been studying for years and years. And we then had the idea to have this kind of separate scene where you are just kind of looking at this night sky, and the gameplay is completely different, where you're trying to find stars to connect these constellations. And originally, when we put that in, we just had one scene in the middle of the game somewhere, which was the one with her and Leela looking at the stars.
Yeah, so the one that we had originally was a full flashback to Sunita as a child in India. So it's a change of location, new character, completely different gameplay, so introducing a new gameplay element. And yeah, so playtests are so invaluable. It's because so playtests, people were like, well, who's Auntie Leela? Like, where did she come from? Yeah, so this particular, so there's 3 segments where you use the star map and you do the constellation sequences, and this one solves a lot of the problems that the playtest threw up, and things that we realized are problematic. So it brings forward that the new gameplay, and also Sunita mentions Leela Auntie at the end of this sequence, and so it introduces this character from her past who introduced her to the constellations. So yeah, it kind of solves a few things. It also gives us a really nice scene between Dylan and Sunita, and just the sort of playfulness of their relationship. Again, sort of underlining her kind of earnestness. She's trying to tell him about the stars and he's just like goofing around, but also respecting her and listening as well. But he's obviously the more goofy one of the pair.
I think because we had originally just one of these star map scenes, and then we had 3 later on, we wanted like a unique way of entering each of them, and also wanted to make sure that they were kind of spaced relatively evenly throughout the game. So that's why originally we had a telescope model in the study that didn't really do anything, and then we decided to make it more it's always an important object in terms of Sunita herself, but we made it more of a sort of important object to the game as well. by making it the entrance to the second stargazing scene in the dining room. For me, it was another part of the game that I really enjoyed just tinkering with and iterating on, and getting to feel really good was these like transitions in and out of the stargazing scenes. I really like, especially with the teacup transition, there's a little tea stain on the bottom of the teacup that kind of looks a little bit like Saturn or something in a galaxy, which maybe is for Sunita what kind of triggers that particular memory.
But yeah, so this is our Sunita room. Really, this is where you get to know her a lot about her background and who she was, or who she is. She's still that person, even though she has dementia. So we find out that she's a scientist. She's a very highly respected scientist, with awards and, magazine covers and things. And this kind of grew over time, who she was and, what her life was and how she met Dylan. And, I think the award was there pretty much from the start, from the first draft. And then we laid in things like, maybe she's, highly celebrated. And then it was like, what is the award for exactly? And then I came up with the idea that she's a cosmologist, because I know a few women who are cosmologists, and I thought that's a really cool job. So, and yeah, India has that connection with, sort of, astronomy and science and those sorts of things. So I thought it was like a cool job for her to have come to the UK to study. And this is her workplace where she'd have worked throughout her life here, basically. That's what this room is establishing. It's establishing sort of character and background. This room sort of became a tutorial room level over time, as people played it and got confused by certain things. The quietness of the game, people sometimes take their headphones off and say, oh, I don't think the sound's working. So that's when we thought maybe we should have a hard floor in here and have footsteps, and maybe we should have something going past the window outside. And so we considered things like that, and then also what objects should be in here, and how you interact with the objects and how that leads you through to how the main mechanics of the game.
So we kind of wanted to have a way that would make sure the player knew what the controls were without specifically saying press A to interact and that kind of thing. So I remember when early on we were going to have a key that you had to find, and then this door in the porch was going to be locked. But we sort of decided that it didn't make a lot of sense that she would be in this tiny porch area and had maybe locked herself in.
Yeah, locked in her own porch.
Yeah, I think it was
just so many questions. It's like, how long has she been there?
Yeah.
Where's her carer?
And then you never use a key anytime in the rest of the game. So we decided instead to make it so that you couldn't see very well at the start because you hadn't got your glasses on, and the first thing you had to do was put your glasses on, and after that point you could open the door.
Yeah. And then the other bit of feedback we got was that the goal wasn't clear from this room. So from this moment, it takes a while to find out what you're actually doing, what the goal of the game is, which is where the post-it note comes in on the notice board, which is just above the glasses, handily. So, yeah, and the note says, find Dylan, obviously. Mm-hmm. And from there, that's what Sunita needs to do. So the umbrella, it became a bit of a sort of iconic thing for the whole game, and kind of ties the game together from beginning to end. They meet in the rain and it ends in the rain. And so you can pick up the umbrella, as you know, and interact with it. But the very first event that we took the game to was a Comic-Con at the end of my road in Taunton, which is a small market town in Somerset in the UK. And this event was happening, and my friend who writes and draws his own comic books was going, and so I was like, oh yeah, maybe we could take that as a sort of test ground. It's, you know, totally not going to be our audience, but we'll see how much it is. And they said we could have the table for free because we weren't selling anything. And so we were like, wow, it would be rude not to. And we were super nervous about it because we just thought, oh, nobody is going to be interested in this game about, you know, inverted commas, an old lady in a house who can't remember stuff. And yeah, so I think one of my friends was like, yeah, kids, come and do some reading. Because it's just so narrative based. So we were like, yeah, nobody's going to like this because there's stormtroopers and Darth Vader wandering around and all this cool stuff. And then us. But we were pleasantly surprised. Yeah, people really engaged with it a lot, like from all ages. So there were sort of kids with their parents trying to play it and they really loved it. And then sort of 12, 13-year-old boys would go and get their friends to come back and play it. And they were really excited about it. It was really cool. But we had a bug with the umbrella. So people couldn't put the umbrella down. So the umbrella was just like in their hand everywhere. And then we had the sort of the loop scene, didn't we? Because that was in. But so there was this one kid who got really frustrated by the fact that he couldn't sort of win the game, that he couldn't succeed with this thing. And he just came away and he was just like, we were like, you know, what did you think? He was like, yeah, it was cool. He's like, but what was with all the umbrellas?
Oh my god, yeah. I mean, it didn't happen every time, but it happened like a lot. And every other person maybe would just be like, oh, I guess